"Do you even know where you are, old man?" The officer's voice was sharp, laced with the brittle confidence of youth. He tapped a finger on the laminated card, a gesture of pure, unadulterated contempt. "This ID looks older than my grandfather, and he's been dead for 10 years. Now what's your real name? And why are you trying to access a secure federal perimeter?" James Atherton, 85 years old, sat perfectly still in the driver's seat of his meticulously maintained 1998 Lincoln Town car. His hands, gnarled with age but steady as stone, rested on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. His gaze wasn't on the belligerent young officer but on a point somewhere beyond him, a trick of a lifetime spent assessing threats from every angle. The rookie cop, Bradley Finch, exchanged an exasperated look with his more seasoned partner, Maria Reyes. She sighed, her posture one of weary resignation. "Sir, we need a valid state-issued driver's license and your vehicle registration. We're going to have to ask you to step out of the car." What they didn't know was that the man they were treating like a senile trespasser was the very reason this secure perimeter existed today. They didn't know that in less than 20 minutes, a full Secret Service motorcade, led by one of the highest-ranking directors in the agency, would scream to a halt right here, not for a security breach, but in a desperate search for the very man they were blocking. The first light of dawn was a quiet affair at Jim Atherton's small, tidy home. It was a ritual, a bulwark against the chaos of memory and the entropy of age. The day began not with an alarm clock, but with an internal chronometer set by decades of service. 6 a.m. His feet, clad in worn leather slippers, made no sound on the polished hardwood floors as he moved to the kitchen. The air was cool and smelled of old books and lemon oil. He didn't use a modern coffee machine. Instead, he measured out whole beans into an old hand crank grinder, the rhythmic, grating sound of familiar music in the silent house. He filled a silver percolator, a relic from a time before single-serve pods, and set it on the gas stove. As he waited for the soft gurgling to begin, his eyes swept the room. It was a habit he'd never broken, clearing a room, assessing points of entry, noting what was out of place. Everything was in its place. His gaze settled on a small, felt-lined shadow box on the wall beside the kitchen table. It wasn't filled with the garish gleam of metals or ribbons. Instead, it held a collection of seemingly mundane objects: a tie clip with a faded presidential seal, a single spent brass casing, a set of cufflinks bearing a small stylized star. In the center, on a bed of dark blue velvet, lay a simple Zippo lighter. Its chrome finish was dulled and scratched, the edges worn smooth from years in a pocket. The insignia of the United States Secret Service was barely visible, a ghost of an eagle and a shield. For Jim, that lighter was a more potent symbol than any medal. It was the weight of responsibility, the warmth of camaraderie, the quick, reliable spark in the darkest of moments. As the coffee began to percolate, its rich aroma filling the small kitchen, he leaned closer to the shadow box. The soft plink of the percolator's glass top echoed a different sound, a metallic click from half a century ago. Suddenly, the smell of coffee was gone, replaced by the scent of jet fuel and damp wool. The quiet kitchen dissolved into the roaring chaos of a helicopter's rotor wash on the White House lawn. Rain, cold and biting, slicked the pavement. The shouting of orders, the crush of the press corps, the frantic energy of a departure under threat. He could feel the familiar weight of his coat, the bulge of the holstered Sig Sauer P-228 under his arm, the cold metal of the Zippo in his pocket, a talisman against the storm. His hand instinctively went to his side, his fingers twitching. The gentle click of the kitchen clock on the wall, marking 6:15 a.m., shattered the illusion. The roar of the helicopter faded, replaced by the gentle bubbling from the stove. The scent of coffee returned. He took a slow, deep breath, a technique he'd mastered to calm his heart rate in moments of extreme stress. It still worked. He poured the dark, fragrant coffee into a thick ceramic mug that read "World's Okayest Grandpa," a gag gift from a grandniece years ago. He smiled faintly. If only she knew. He carried the mug to his small study, a room lined with books on history and geopolitics, and sat at his heavy oak desk. Jim Atherton was a man who lived in a state of sharpened awareness, a constant low-level hum of observation that had been drilled into him over 35 years of protecting the most powerful people on the planet. He noticed things. He saw the way the mailman's gait changed on Tuesdays when his bag was heavier. He knew the precise moment his neighbor's furnace kicked on in the morning by the puff of vapor from the chimney. He could sit on a park bench and, without seeming to, construct a complete pattern-of-life analysis for every person who walked by. It wasn't a choice, it was a fundamental part of his being, like breathing. He lived by a simple code, a philosophy forged in the crucible of his profession: patience is a weapon, and silence is a shield. He'd seen so much in his life, witnessed the grand theater of history from the wings. He'd seen powerful men crumble under pressure and quiet men rise to impossible occasions. He'd learned that the loudest person in the room was almost never the most dangerous. The true irony of life, he often thought, was that the people who had the most to teach, the most to share, often looked like they had nothing left to say. They were ghosts of a different era, their stories etched into the lines on their faces, visible only to those who knew how to look. He set his coffee mug down and opened the top drawer of his desk. Beneath a stack of neatly organized bills and a checkbook, he withdrew a single folded piece of paper. The paper was yellowed and soft as cloth, the creases worn thin from 1,000 unfoldings. It was a letter, dated June 10, 1974. The handwriting was a familiar looping scrawl. It was from his partner Frank Miller. "Jimmy," it read, "if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back from this one. Don't you dare mourn. We knew the risks, but I'm asking you for one thing. In 50 years on this exact day, go to the dedication. They're naming the new training annex at the Rowley Training Center after the old man. Go for me. Be my eyes. And when you're there, find my boy Michael. He'll be a man by then. Tell him his old man was a stubborn mule, but he loved him more than anything. Don't let them forget us, Jimmy. Be the keeper of the faith." Frank had died 3 days later, in a motorcade accident in Salzburg, Austria, shielding the First Lady's vehicle with his own. Today was June 10, 2024. 50 years to the day. Jim folded the letter, his fingers tracing the familiar creases. It wasn't just an event, it was a sacred duty, a promise made to a brother. He tucked the letter into the inner pocket of his tweed jacket, a silent testament to the personal stakes of the day. He finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, and placed it precisely in the center of the drying rack. It was time to go. He picked up his car keys and walked out into the bright, unforgiving morning. The checkpoint was a temporary affair, set up a mile from the main entrance of the James J. Rowley Training Center, a sprawling, secure campus hidden away in the Maryland countryside. 2 police cruisers were parked diagonally across the road, creating a chicane that forced all traffic to a crawl. Officer Bradley Finch, 25 years old, barely 3 years on the force, stood with his chest puffed out, reveling in the authority of his uniform and badge. He viewed the world in simple binaries, good guys and bad guys, compliant and non-compliant. He saw an 85-year-old man in an old car, looking confused, and his mind clicked instantly to a preset category: potential problem. Elderly driver, lost, possibly senile, trying to get onto a high-security federal installation. "Sir, I'm not going to ask you again," Finch said, his voice rising in pitch. "This," he flicked the ID card again, "is not a valid form of identification. It has no hologram, no magnetic strip, no scannable barcode. It's a laminated piece of cardboard. It's a Treasury Department credential, issued 1968. It doesn't expire," Jim stated calmly, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. He didn't offer any more information. In his world, you gave people only what they needed to know. Need to know was a religion. Finch let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Treasury? Buddy, this is a Secret Service facility. You're in the wrong spy movie. Now I need a real ID." Jim's partner, Officer Maria Reyes, 34 and with a decade of experience, stepped forward. She was watching the old man's eyes. They weren't confused. They were unnervingly calm, observant. He wasn't looking at Finch's face. He was tracking the movement of his hands, his feet, the position of his sidearm. It sent a tiny prickling sensation up her spine. "Let's just slow it down a bit, Brad," she said quietly. "Sir, do you have a driver's license we could see? We just need to verify who you are." Jim blinked slowly, his focus shifting to her. He appreciated her tone. It was professional. He reached deliberately into his jacket, the same pocket where Frank's letter rested, and produced a wallet. From it, he extracted a pristine modern Maryland driver's license and handed it to her. Reyes took it. "Thank you, Mr. Atherton." She glanced at the photo. It was him, a bit younger but unmistakably the same man. The birth date confirmed he was 85. She walked back to their cruiser to run the name. Finch, however, was not placated. He saw the gesture not as compliance but as the trick of a cagey old man. See, he had a real ID the whole time. He was just trying to be difficult. He leaned back down, his face close to the open window. The smell of his cheap cologne was cloying. "So, Mr. Atherton, what's your business at the Rowley Center today? Are you lost? Did you take a wrong turn looking for the bingo hall?" Jim's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He had protected men from assassins' bullets and terrorist bombs. He had stood firm in the face of screaming mobs and political firestorms. But the casual, condescending disrespect of this boy, This child playing at being a man with a gun ignited a cold fire deep within him. Still, he held his tongue. Patience was a weapon, and his was legendary. "I have an invitation," Jim said, his voice flat and even. "An invitation," Finch repeated, drawing the words out mockingly. "To what?" "The grand opening of 1974, he smirked, pleased with his own wit. "You're going to have to come with us, sir. We need to figure out what's going on with you." Reyes returned from the cruiser, a frown on her face. "The license is clean. No wants, no warrants. Address is local." She looked from her partner to the old man. "Brad, maybe we just call the gate, see if his name is on the visitor list." "No," Finch snapped, asserting his perceived authority. "He's acting suspicious, he's being evasive, and he presented a fake federal ID. That's enough for me. Standard procedure. Get him out of the car. We're going to search the vehicle." He looked back at Jim, his eyes hard. "Sir, I am ordering you to step out of the car. Now." The quiet dignity with which Jim Atherton endured the next 20 minutes was a spectacle of self-control. Officer Finch, puffed up with a sense of righteous procedure, ordered him out of the Lincoln. Jim moved with a slow, deliberate economy of motion, his body stiff but not frail. He stood by the side of the road, his hands held loosely at his sides, as Finch began a pat-down. "What's this?" Finch asked, his hand pausing on the small, hard rectangle in Jim's jacket pocket. "A letter," Jim said. Finch pulled it out, saw the yellowed, fragile paper and scoffed. He didn't bother to unfold it, simply tossing it onto the passenger seat of the car. "Right, a letter." As Finch began his unnecessarily thorough search of the Lincoln, a small line of cars began to form behind the checkpoint. People on their way to work, to appointments. A few drivers rolled down their windows, craning their necks to see the source of the delay. They saw a young, aggressive cop and a very old man standing stoically by the roadside. Murmurs began to ripple through the small, captive audience. Poor old guy. What did he do? Probably just confused. Pity and judgment mingled in the morning air. Finch opened the glove compartment, rummaging through a neat stack of insurance papers and the car's manual. He pulled out the Zippo lighter that Jim kept there as a spare. He flicked it open with a thumb, trying to look cool. It didn't light. "Figures," Finch muttered, tossing it onto the seat next to the letter. "Just like everything else you own. Old and broken." Jim's eyes, which had remained fixed on the horizon, now settled on Finch. A flicker of something cold and hard passed through them before they returned to their neutral state. He had used that lighter to burn classified documents in a hotel room in Moscow. He had used it to light a candle at a memorial for a fallen agent in Beirut. He had used it to share a cigarette with Frank Miller on 1,000 stakeouts. Broken. This boy had no concept of what it meant for something to endure. Reyes, meanwhile, was trying to mitigate the situation. "Brad, we've got a traffic jam. Let's just run his name by the gatehouse. 5 minutes. "I'm conducting a search, Maria," he said, not looking at her. "This is my scene. Now pop the trunk." Jim calmly took the keys from the ignition and handed them to Reyes, who avoided eye contact as she opened the trunk. It was practically empty. A small toolkit, a spare tire, and a neatly folded blanket. Finch poked at the blanket with his baton. Nothing. Frustration was making him reckless. He slammed the trunk shut and stalked back to Jim. "Okay, Grandpa, I'm not getting anything out of you. Where were you really going? Visiting a grave? The cemetery is 5 miles in the other direction." "I told you," Jim said, his voice still infuriatingly level. "I have an invitation to the Rowley Center. And I told you, I don't believe you." Finch's voice was now a full-blown shout, drawing more attention from the waiting cars. "You're either a liar or you're senile. Which is it?" Inside the secure perimeter of the Rowley Training Center, Sarah Jenkins was having a very bad morning. As the lead event coordinator for the Treasury Department, she was in charge of the dedication ceremony for the new Frank Miller Strategic Operations Annex. It was a high-profile event. The Secretary of the Treasury was attending. The Director of the Secret Service was the keynote speaker. And most importantly, Michael Miller, a successful architect and the son of the fallen hero, was the guest of honor. But the other guest of honor, the linchpin of the entire event, was late. James Atherton, the living legend himself. "Anything?" Sarah asked her assistant, a young, efficient man named David. "Nothing, ma'am," David said, looking up from his tablet. "He's not answering his cell phone, which isn't unusual for him, I'm told. He's not at the main gate. The local PD unit at Checkpoint Alpha on Route 198 reports a minor traffic stop, but that's it." Sarah's brow furrowed. Jim Atherton was many things, but late was not one of them. The man was a human clock. For him to be 20 minutes late to an event honoring his fallen partner was unthinkable. An icy knot of dread began to form in her stomach. Checkpoint Alpha, she repeated. That's on his route from his house. Get me the officer in charge of the detail on the phone. Now. A moment later, David had the county police dispatch on the line and patched them through to Sarah's desk phone. This is Event Coordinator Jenkins at the Rowley Center, she said, her voice crisp and professional. I understand your officers are manning a checkpoint on Route 198. Can you confirm the identity of the individual in the vehicle you currently have stopped? There was a pause, a crackle of radio traffic. Ma'am, one moment. The dispatcher's voice returned a minute later. Yes, ma'am. Officers Finch and Reyes have stopped a Mr. James Atherton, elderly male, seems a bit confused. They're just making sure he's all right. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Confused? Let me assure you, Sergeant, James Atherton is the single least confused man you will ever meet. What is the reason for the stop? One moment. More crackling. Officer Finch reports the driver presented an unusual form of identification and is being uncooperative about his destination. Uncooperative? Sarah's voice was now dangerously quiet. Let me guess. Was the ID a Treasury Department credential, issued around 1968? The dispatcher sounded taken aback. Yes, ma'am. That's what the report says. How did you know? Sarah closed her eyes, picturing the scene. A young, arrogant cop and the quiet, immovable force that was Jim Atherton. It was a recipe for disaster. She stood up, her mind racing. This couldn't be handled through a dispatcher. She needed bigger guns. Sergeant, she said, her voice now steel, tell your officers to stand down. Do not touch Mr. Atherton. Do not speak to him. Do not let him leave. I am making a call. You have inadvertently detained a guest of the United States government. A very, very important guest. She hung up before he could respond and immediately dialed a number she knew by heart, the direct line to the office of the Director of the Secret Service, Daniel Evans, who was already on site in a holding room reviewing his speech. His aide answered. Director Evans's office. This is Sarah Jenkins, she said, her words a torrent. I have an emergency. Get me the director, now. There was a brief protest which she cut off. Tell him it's about Pathfinder. That was the key. The name was a legend within the agency, a call sign from a bygone era. A moment later, a deep, commanding voice came on the line. This is Evans. What about Pathfinder? Sir, Sarah said, relief and panic warring in her voice. He's been stopped, County PD, at the checkpoint on Route 198. They think he's a confused old man. They're searching his car. Sir, they're humiliating him. There was a dead, chilling silence on the other end of the line. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. When Director Evans spoke again, his voice was transformed. The warm political tone was gone, replaced by the Arctic fury of a field commander whose top asset was under threat. Did you say county police are harassing James Atherton? He asked, the words clipped and precise. Yes, Director. Stay on the line, Sarah. She heard him turn away from the phone and bark an order. Scramble the package. Full motorcade. Lights and sirens. I want every agent in this building who isn't nailed to the floor moving. Destination. Checkpoint Alpha. Route 198. ETR. 2 minutes. Go, now. He came back on the line with her. Sarah, you did the right thing. Tell me what they said. What was the issue? His ID, sir. His old credential. They said it was fake. A low guttural sound, something between a laugh and a snarl, came from the director. Fake? That ID has more history and authority in it than their entire police department. Do not, under any circumstances, let those officers leave. We're on our way. Back at the checkpoint, Officer Finch had reached the end of his non-existent rope. His search had yielded nothing. The old man's calm defiance was grating on his nerves, making him look foolish in front of his partner and the growing line of onlookers. He had to reassert control. He had to win. That's it. I'm done with this, he declared, striding back to Jim. You're refusing to cooperate. You're providing false identification. And frankly, I think you're a danger to yourself and others. I'm placing you under arrest for obstructing an investigation. Reyes's eyes went wide. Brad, no, on what grounds? This is a bad stop. We're going to get jammed up for this. I'm the senior officer on this scene, Finch lied, his voice cracking slightly. He was in fact junior to Reyes in both age and time on the force. And I'm making the call. He pulled out his handcuffs. Mr. Atherton, turn around and place your hands behind your back. Jim did not move. He simply looked at Finch, his gaze as heavy as granite. He said nothing, but his silence was a definitive act of defiance. It was the calm refusal of a man who had faced down threats far greater than a boy with a badge and an ego. He would not be handcuffed. Not here. "Not today. That's an order, old man," Finch shouted, his hand reaching for Jim's arm. It was in that precise moment that the world changed. It started as a faint, distant siren, a single wail that quickly multiplied, layering into a complex, terrifying chorus of sound that was growing closer at an impossible speed. Every head at the checkpoint, Finch, Reyes, the drivers in their cars turned to look down the highway. Over the rise they appeared. Not a police car, not an ambulance. It was a wave of black steel and flashing lights. Two motorcycle outriders, their strobes dazzling, appeared first, clearing the path. Behind them, a phalanx of black Chevrolet Suburbans, the kind you only see in movies, moved in a tight, aggressive formation. They didn't slow down. They ate up the road, their engines a deep, throaty roar that vibrated in the chest. The motorcade screamed to a halt at the checkpoint with breathtaking precision, forming a semicircle around Jim's Lincoln and the two police cruisers, effectively sealing them in. The air filled with the slam of heavy doors. Men in dark, impeccably tailored suits emerged from the Suburbans. They moved with a fluid, disciplined grace, their eyes constantly scanning, their hands held in a state of relaxed readiness. They wore earpieces and sunglasses, their faces grim and unreadable. They were Secret Service, an entire counter-assault team. Officer Finch stood frozen, his hand still outstretched toward Jim, the handcuffs dangling uselessly from his other hand. His mouth hung open. Reyes had already taken 2 steps back, her face a mask of dawning horror. The onlookers in their cars were now holding up their phones, recording the unbelievable scene. The rear door of the lead Suburban opened. Out stepped a tall, imposing man in a suit that cost more than Finch's monthly salary. He had graying temples and an air of absolute, unquestionable authority. He ignored Finch and Reyes as if they were pieces of road gravel. He ignored the crowd. His eyes were locked on one person and one person only, James Atherton. Director Daniel Evans strode across the pavement, his hard-soled shoes making a sharp, rhythmic sound that cut through the sudden silence. He stopped 3 feet in front of Jim. The world held its breath. Then, in a movement as crisp and precise as a rifle shot, Director Evans snapped to attention. His right hand came up in a flawless, military-style salute, his fingers touching the edge of his eyebrow. "Pathfinder," Director Evans said, his voice ringing with a deep, profound respect that echoed across the blacktop. "Sir, it's an honor to see you." Jim Atherton slowly, almost tiredly, raised a hand and returned a brief, informal salute. A gesture between equals. "Danny," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "you're making a scene." Evans allowed a small, grim smile to touch his lips. "I think the scene was already made, sir. We're just here to clean it up." He dropped his salute and turned for the first time to face the 2 petrified police officers. His eyes, cold as a winter sea, landed on Finch. "You," Evans said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "What is your name and badge number?" Finch swallowed hard, his face drained of all color. He looked like a child who had just been caught setting fire to the principal's office. Officer Finch, sir. Badge 734. Evans's gaze flickered to the fake ID Finch had tossed onto the passenger seat. He then looked back at Finch, his expression one of utter disbelief and disgust. He gestured for one of his agents, who retrieved the card and handed it to him. "Officer Finch," Evans began, his voice rising so everyone could hear. "The onlookers, the other agents, and especially the 2 local cops, you are holding in your hand a piece of history. This credential was issued to Special Agent James Atherton in 1968. In 1972, in Ottawa, a man with a knife broke through a security line, heading for the president. Before anyone else could react, Jim Atherton took him down. He earned his first commendation for valor for that. That's what this ID represents." He took a step closer, his voice a low, cutting blade. "In 1981, outside the Washington Hilton, shots were fired, while other agents were drawing their weapons and covering the president. Jim Atherton, callsign Pathfinder, did not duck. He did not draw. He became the path. He physically shielded the direct line between the shooter and the evacuation route, clearing the way for the president's escape. He didn't fire a single shot, but his strategic positioning saved the lives of 2 of his fellow agents and ensured the president was not trapped in the line of fire. That action is legendary. It is taught to every single class of new agents at the very facility you are blocking him from entering." A wave of gasps and murmurs swept through the crowd. Phones were held higher. Officer Reyes looked like she was going to be physically ill. Finch's face had gone from white to a blotchy, mottled red. Evans wasn't finished. He held up the credential. "This piece of laminated cardboard has been in the room with 7 different presidents. It has been present for the signing of peace treaties and the planning of wars. It has been soaked in the rain at state funerals and baked in the desert sun on diplomatic tours. The man you just tried to handcuff, the man you accused of being senile, has forgotten more about courage, duty, and honor than you will ever know. He is not a guest of the government, officer. He is the government. He is the quiet, unseen wall that has protected it for decades, and you treated him with scorn because you couldn't be bothered to look past the wrinkles on his face. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant cawing of a crow. Evans tucked the precious ID carefully into his own breast pocket for safekeeping. He turned his back on Finch, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and faced Jim once more. "Sir," he said, his voice softening again, "we have a ceremony to get to. Michael is waiting for you." Officer Finch, humbled into a state of near catatonic shock, finally found his voice. It was a pathetic squeak. "Sir, Director." Director Evans turned his head slowly, fixing him with a stare that could freeze fire. "That's the entire point, son. You didn't know, and you didn't care to find out. You saw an old man and you made an assumption. You let your ego write a check that your authority couldn't cash." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "You have no idea how much trouble you are in." But Jim Atherton stepped forward slightly, placing a gentle hand on the director's arm. "Danny," he said quietly, "enough." He then turned his gaze to the young officer. For the first time, he looked directly into Finch's eyes. There was no anger there, no gloating, only a profound, weary sadness. "Son," Jim said, his voice raspy but firm, "the badge you wear gives you authority, but it doesn't give you wisdom. Never judge the book by its cover. You have no idea what battles people have fought to get their pages worn." With that, he turned away. An agent opened the door of the lead Suburban for him, and he slid inside with the same quiet dignity he'd maintained all morning. Director Evans gave Finch one last withering look before getting in the other side. The doors slammed shut, the motorcade's engines revved, and with a final chirp of a siren, the black vehicles pulled away, leaving Finch and Reyes standing in a cloud of exhaust and abject humiliation. The fallout was immediate and seismic. Before his motorcade had even reached the main gate of the Rowley Center, Director Evans was on his encrypted phone. The person on the other end was Robert Maxwell, the chief of the county police department. The conversation was not a negotiation. "Chief Maxwell, this is Director Evans of the Secret Service." There was a sputtering on the other end. "Director, to what do I owe the honor?" "There is no honor in this call, Chief." Evans cut in, his voice like ice. "Two of your officers, Finch and Reyes, just illegally detained and publicly humiliated one of the most decorated agents in the history of my service at a checkpoint outside my facility. They accused him of being a senile old man with a fake ID. I had to deploy a CAT team to extract him." The silence from the chief's end was profound. Evans could almost hear the man's career flashing before his eyes. I am so sorry. I can assure you, you can assure me of nothing right now, Robert," Evans said, using the chief's first name to underscore his dominance in the situation. "What you can do is listen. I'm not demanding you fire the boy, though God knows he deserves it. Firing him is the easy way out. It doesn't fix the underlying problem. It just makes him someone else's problem." What do you want, Director?" the chief asked, his voice meek. "I want change," Evans stated. "I want something constructive to come from the utter failure of training and respect my agent was subjected to this morning. Starting next month, I want every officer in your department from rookie to captain to attend a mandatory 4-hour training block. It will be called the Atherton Protocol. It will be a class on situational humility, on recognizing veteran and retired federal credentials, and on the simple fundamental practice of de-escalation and showing respect to the elderly, who you might just find have a hell of a lot more to them than meets the eye." "Yes, Director, of course, we can arrange that." "I'm not finished," Evans said. "The class will be designed by my people, and it will be co-taught on a volunteer basis by retired agents from this facility. We will turn this embarrassing incident into a teachable moment that will echo for years. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, Director," the chief said, his voice filled with a mix of terror and relief. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Evans said grimly. "Thank the extraordinary grace of James Atherton. If it were up to me, I'd have Officer Finch polishing boots here for the next 6 months." He ended the call without saying goodbye. The seeds of systemic change, born from a moment of foolish pride, had been planted. A week later, Officer Brad Finch drove his personal car down a quiet, tree-lined street in a neighborhood of modest, well-kept homes. He was off-duty, wearing jeans and a polo shirt. He felt more exposed and vulnerable than he ever had in his uniform. He parked in front of a small, tidy brick house with a perfectly manicured lawn, the address he'd gotten from a sympathetic desk sergeant at the precinct. He sat in his car for a full 10 minutes, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He had replayed the incident at the checkpoint 1,000 times in his mind. The shame was a physical weight, a constant pressure in his chest. He'd been arrogant, cruel, and profoundly wrong. The dressing down he'd received from his chief had been brutal, but it was nothing compared to the self-recrimination that haunted his quiet moments. He had a choice. He could accept his suspension, take the mandatory training, and try to forget, or he could do the one thing his fear was screaming at him not to do. He could face the man he had wronged. Taking a deep, shaky breath, he got out of the car and walked up the stone path to the front door. He raised his hand to knock but hesitated. Through a large window to the side of the door, he could see into a room that looked like a study or a workshop, and he saw him. James Atherton wasn't polishing metals or cleaning weapons. He was sitting at a small table, a magnifying glass in one hand and a tiny tool in the other, meticulously working on the inner mechanism of an old-fashioned clock. His brow was furrowed in concentration, his movements patient and precise. He was completely absorbed, a craftsman lost in his trade. The sight was so normal, so humble. It made Finch's earlier behavior seem even more monstrous in comparison. He finally found the courage and knocked softly on the door. Jim Atherton looked up, his focus shifting from the clock. He saw the young officer standing on his porch. He showed no surprise, no anger. He simply set his tools down, rose slowly, and opened the door. "Officer Finch," he said, his voice neutral. "Mr. Atherton." "Sir," Brad stammered. I know I have no right to be here. I had to come and apologize, in person. What I did, it was inexcusable. There's no excuse. I was arrogant, and I was wrong, and I am truly, deeply sorry for the way I treated you." Jim looked at him for a long moment, his eyes searching the young man's face. He saw not arrogance but a deep and genuine shame. He nodded slowly. "Come in, son," he said, stepping back to let him pass. He led Brad not to the formal living room but to the small kitchen where his day had begun. He gestured for the young officer to sit at the small wooden table while he retrieved two of the world's okayest grandpa mugs and poured them both coffee from the same silver percolator. He set a mug in front of Brad and sat down opposite him. The silence stretched for a minute, thick and awkward. Brad didn't know what to say. He expected a lecture, a rebuke, anything. Instead, Jim asked a simple question. "Why did you become a cop, Brad?" The question caught him off guard. "Sir, why this job? There are easier ways to make a living." Brad looked down at his mug. Not at all," Jim said softly. "Every man in my line of work started for the exact same reason. The desire to stand between the innocent and the threat. It's a noble calling." He took a sip of his coffee. "Let me tell you a story. My first year in the service, I was on a protection detail for the vice president in Chicago. Young, cocky, thought I knew everything. Just like you." He smiled faintly, a sad, knowing smile. "We were working a rope line. A man in the crowd made a sudden move, reached into his jacket. I reacted, overreacted. I vaulted the rope, slammed the man into a brick wall, put a knee in his back, had my weapon to his head, caused a huge panic. The detail collapsed. The VP was rushed out. It was a mess." He paused, his eyes distant. And what was the man reaching for? A pen. He was a reporter trying to get an autograph for his kid. I almost broke his arm. I humiliated him in front of hundreds of people. My supervisor, a man a lot like your Director Evans, took me aside. I thought my career was over, but he didn't yell. He just said, "Atherton, your eyes are sharp, but your judgment is blind. You see threats everywhere, but you don't see the humanity. Until you can tell the difference, you're a danger to everyone, including yourself." That lesson, it stuck with me for 50 years. Brad looked up, his own eyes now glistening. "But you became a legend." "I became a legend because I learned from my mistakes," Jim corrected him gently. "Because I learned to look closer, to see the person, not just the potential threat." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old, battered Zippo lighter. He set it on the table between them. It lay there, scratched and dented. "Officer Finch saw this as a piece of junk," Jim said, tapping the lighter. "Old and broken. Useless." He picked it up and with a practiced flick of his thumb, it sparked to life. A strong, steady flame dancing in the quiet kitchen. "But it still works. It has stories. It has history. It looks worn because it has been used for its purpose. It's been a light in dark places." He closed the lid with a soft click. "People are like that too, son. Especially the old ones. Don't be so quick to discard something just because it's got a few scratches and dents. You have no idea the fire it might still hold inside." Brad stared at the lighter, then at the old man, and for the first time he didn't see a victim or a legend. He saw a teacher, he saw the humanity, and in that quiet kitchen over a cup of coffee, the real lesson of the Atherton Protocol was taught and learned, not in a classroom but from one man to another. The journey from arrogance to wisdom had begun. If you enjoyed this story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next story of veteran valor.